Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video where today we're going to be talking all about my fancy new lights. Just kidding, we're going to be talking about Twilio. So Twilio is a SaaS provider, and in this video and a series of future videos, we'll be talking all about SaaS providers and whether they're worth investing in. Are they growing? What kind of services do they provide? We'll start today though with Twilio. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's go. Alright, so let's get things started by talking at least a little bit about what Twilio is and what the company does. So Twilio is what's known as a communications platform as a service provider, or just communications as a service. And what that means is that Twilio allows you to reach customers wherever they are. So they have services that can send text messages, receive text messages. They have services that can place phone calls, receive phone calls, send email, receive email. You get the idea, right? You can do pretty much anything communications-wise through Twilio. So as a couple of examples, you've no doubt received a text message from a doctor's office or a dentist office or even a hairstylist saying, you've got an appointment coming up, reply yes to accept that appointment. That type of stuff can be powered by Twilio. Another example is transactional email. So in January of 2019, Twilio hopped into this game in a big way. They bought one of the largest companies in the space, SendGrid. And what that means is that you can now use Twilio or use SendGrid to send transactional emails. A transactional email is, say, a forgotten password link. You go to a website, you click forgotten password, you type in your email address, and an email is fired off. That can be powered by SendGrid. And there are a number of other examples as well. Things such as chatbots on websites. Twilio can power those. Or say DoorDash. When you place a DoorDash order, you receive a message that says, you can text back and you'll be in contact with your delivery driver. Obviously, DoorDash doesn't want to just give out all these names and phone numbers of their drivers. And that kind of stuff can be powered by Twilio. You send a text message to the DoorDash provided number. That gets routed to the DoorDash driver in the app. They can respond through the app, and that gets routed back to you. All these types of things, Twilio powers. And to show you just how easy it is, I have a Twilio account, and behind me in the background of this video now, you are going to see me send a text message to myself. So let's talk a little bit about financials. Obviously, we're talking about making an investment, so we should probably make sure that Twilio is growing its revenues. Twilio has good user numbers. Let's dive into Q3 though. I'm going to look over here where I've got the numbers up on screen. Q3 revenues of $448 million. That was up almost 52% year over year. So even in a year where, COVID just decimated a whole bunch of businesses, things like Uber that used Twilio to send text messages was not doing too well. People weren't out in cars. Even in a year like that, Twilio still managed to increase its revenues over 50%. So if we go back a little bit to Q2, revenues grew at 45% during that period. So to get back north of the 50s was a good performing quarter for Twilio. Now, as we look forward to Q4, the company estimates that their revenue will grow year over year at around about 35%. That's their actual guidance. So we're looking at still a company that's growing at 30 to 50% per year, growing that top line. But it should be noted that Twilio's original guidance actually called for Q3 revenue growth, again in that mid-30s range. So to get 50% revenue growth, they exceeded expectations in a massive way. If they can continue exceeding these expectations, you're probably going to see big pops in this stock every reporting period. So this number is going to sound a little bit bad, at least to people who have, researched SaaS before and know that these companies generally have massive margins. But Twilio's Q3 gross margin, that is, came in at around about 55%. Now, SaaS companies tend to have gross margins that are just eye-popping wild, 80% isn't unheard of. So why is Twilio down here at 55%? And this is not a red flag. This is maybe a flag, just a little flag. It's not a bad thing. It's mainly because Twilio has to pay all of these infrastructure providers. So when you send a text message through Twilio, they then have to send that text message through a provider. Let's say, just for example, AT&T. So if you send a message to an AT&T number, Twilio has to route that through AT&T. AT&T take a fee. Now that can eat into your margins really quick. And that's why we see these gross margins at 55%. But Twilio isn't settling for just providing these services. As we've seen over the past few years, Twilio continues to expand its product offerings to more higher margin niches. So no longer do they just send text messages or phone calls. Twilio now deals with emails. No longer are they having to just pay AT&T and Verizon to send text messages. They're now trying to send messages through WhatsApp and other different communication mediums. And they're building products as well that allow for greater gross margins. Stuff like Twilio Flex, which is pretty much a one-click communications platform. You can set up Twilio Flex and you pay around about $1 per hour per agent. So if you run a call center or your business has a customer support team, anything like that, you would pay $1 per hour that your customer support team member is working. And they also have flat rate pricing as well. You can pay $150 per named agent. So if I am a customer support agent, it would be $150 for me to have a Twilio Flex account. And you can see where those margins start to grow a little bit. So you're paying that $150 per agent. It doesn't cost Twilio all that much to set up Flex. And you're also going to be paying for those communications on top of it. So you're going to be paying for those text messages or calls that come into your agents. That's not free. That's not covered in this $150 fee. You're still going to be paying for that on top. So while we see 55% gross margins today, it definitely seems that Twilio is leaning towards a future where they can start to capture higher and higher gross margins. It's a little bit different from some of these other SaaS companies that start out with wild gross margins of 80, 90%, and then over time they start to dwindle. Twilio is going the opposite way. They started out with gross margins that are lower, around about 50%, and they're starting to bump them up by offering solutions that don't require all this cost being paid out to different parties. So let's take a look at least some of the metrics that are generally used to value SaaS companies. And there's a couple that I like to take a look at. Depends on the company really, but there's a couple that I want to take a look at for Twilio. And one of them is net dollar retention rate. And net dollar retention rate, in a nutshell, is if you earn $100 from your contracts this year, next year you earn $105, and your retention rate is 105%. If you earn $100 next year, it's 100%, and if you earn $95, that's no good, but it's 95%. So enterprise SaaS companies, this is SaaS providers that are providing to other businesses, they generally have net dollar retention rates of around about 125%, meaning that for every $100 in contracts this year, they're able to bump that up to $125 next year. And 125% is considered good. That's like the gold standard. That's amazing. Twilio routinely beat that. Sometimes they're at 120, sometimes they're at 135, so they're beating it by 10%. This past year, they've been hovering around that 130% range, so that's just great. Another value I like to look at is the enterprise value divided by the sales, just to get an idea of how this company is priced, how the market sees it. Twilio is priced quite high. This value is around about 37-ish today. So you're paying 37 times sales to buy Twilio today. And that means the market favors Twilio in a massive way. They think it's going to continue to grow. They think it's going to grow massively over the coming years. And maybe they're right. Maybe they're wrong though. Time will tell. But as of today, Twilio is priced quite highly. So it is priced highly, but maybe we should talk a little bit about why it is priced so high. And I wanted to start with that net dollar retention rate. So 130% is roughly their average. And they're bringing in $130 new each year because of really network effects or really a developer mindshare. What that means is Twilio is built around developers first. You might remember the video of Steve Ballmer at the Microsoft conference where it's developers, developers, developers.
Developers, 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 developers.
Shortly after that is when SaaS companies, started taking that path. It used to be when selling software, you would go to the CTO and you would work your way down. And the CTO would make that buying decision. They would say, we're going to get this software, but they wouldn't consult the people that would actually be using the software. And so what we've seen in the past few years is sales teams, or even just software in general, it might not even be a sales team involved, but what we've started to see is they're targeting employees rather than executive suite. They're targeting the people that will actually be using the software. And Twilio has done this just tremendously. They have done an amazing job of getting this done. So Twilio has some of the best documentation you're ever going to see. As we saw earlier, I sent a text message, super simple. I haven't used Twilio in several years, but it was made easy by their easily accessible platform, great documentation, super easy stuff. And so by targeting developers first, getting that developer mindshare, they're now able to get in on smaller projects. So maybe there's a smaller project at a company on Google. Maybe Google's running a smaller project and that developer uses Twilio and they just throw that in there. Well, maybe that smaller project starts to grow. And now they're like, well, what did you use? I used Twilio. Well, now Twilio is growing with that project. And this happens all the time at smaller companies too. And sure, Twilio has competitors, but none are as easily accessible as Twilio. So if you're starting a side project today, you're going to use Twilio to send text messages out. That means that as you grow, you're going to continue growing with Twilio. And that's been their strategy all along, is to get that developer mindshare and get developers wanting to use Twilio, wanting to recommend Twilio, and if you're recommending it, you're going to stick with it yourself. And then if you're sticking with Twilio too, you're more likely over time to find their new products. So SendGrid, for instance, maybe you weren't sending emails before, but now you want to send emails as part of your app. Well, what am I going to use? SendGrid also has amazing documentation. It's also a well-run company and you can start sending emails with SendGrid super fast. Now, email is a little bit harder to get sending because you got to warm up those IP addresses. But using something like SendGrid, you can get there sooner than you could with some of these other organizations that maybe require you to talk to a sales team member before you can get started. Now, another thing I really like to see at these SaaS companies is a CEO or someone still in a high-level position that founded the company, that is technical in nature and that isn't, a Harvard MBA grad. And why do I like to see that? Well, it means that the company still has the developer in mind. So Twilio has this with their CEO, Jeff Lawson. He is still CEO. He was the founder of the company and he is chairman of the board, and he still keeps the developer in mind. He's not trying to push sales harder. He is trying to make sure that Twilio deliver the best product for developers. And if they deliver the best product for developers, then the sales will come. It also, you've got a founder that has skin in the game. I doubt Jeff wants to see Twilio fail. I doubt Jeff wants to see Twilio stagnate. He wants to build an amazing company with an amazing brand, and he is sticking around to do just that. He hasn't abandoned the company in any way. He is still the leader of the company, and he is still pushing developer mindshare as the key goal of Twilio. And as long as Jeff sticks around and continues to push that developer mindshare as the key goal of Twilio, I don't see this company stagnating at all. And it's those reasons that we see a 36 or a 37x multiple on this company today. Before I leave, I did want to just give you a couple of things to look up before you consider investing in Twilio, and that's going to be the competitors. There are a lot of competitors in this communication space, and Twilio's arms are huge. They reach across a lot of this communication space, meaning that, there are email service providers that Twilio competes with through SendGrid. There are other communications providers that let you send text messages that Twilio competes with. So definitely check out the competition before considering an investment. For me, I've looked at the competition and We go back to that developer mindshare. We go back to CEO and founder Jeff Lawson's vision. Those are things that, for me, just beat the competition. We've got other providers that send text messages and phone calls like Plivo. If you go to their website, it looks exactly like Twilio. They send text messages, they do phone calls, but they are not putting out, at least with the velocity of Twilio, they're not putting out new features like Twilio. And at least in my eyes, they're not supporting the developer like Twilio is. Another company, and this one is publicly traded, is Bandwidth. They do, again, very similar things to Twilio, but they are not supporting the market like Twilio does. And that is something that I think is just key to Twilio, is that support of the market and support of the developer. Now, one more thing is the market size. Now, you don't have to go out and research this. I already went out and found this IDC post on the communications as a service sort of market size, and they forecast that this will grow from 4.4 billion in 2019 to around about 17.7 billion in 2024. So if it was 4.4 billion in 2019 and Twilio was bringing in 700-800 million of that, there's a good chance that they continue to grow to bring in a good $2-3-4 billion by 2024. And that would be some significant growth still to come from this company. Now, this is the end of the video, and I hope I've provided you with a good overview of Twilio. We saw it in action. We know what the company does, at least a little bit. It would take an hour or more of video to go over all the different services that Twilio offers, but we've at least seen a taste of what Twilio offers and what they do as a company. Now, I'm not going to provide a buy or sell recommendation. I don't want to get into that game. But for me, I am a holder of Twilio, and I've been holding the company for a while now. It's been, I think round about mid-2019 that I first bought Twilio, and I've kind of pared back a little bit as it reaches these high price levels, but I'm still holding some of the stock, at least for the foreseeable future. But yeah, that's going to be a wrap on this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a thumbs up. It lets me know that you like these SaaS videos. I do plan on making more about different providers out there and just covering what they do, how they do it, and who they're selling to. One I'm planning is Palantir. That's a company that is basically a black box that many people don't know anything about, but it's still soaring anyway. Yeah, if you liked it, leave a thumbs up, consider subscribing to the channel. I make stock videos, and I'm going to be making more of these SaaS videos. Also, leave a comment below about Twilio. If you have any thoughts on the company, thoughts on it as an investment, or just thoughts on this space in general. Maybe you are a bigger fan of Bandwidth at this time. I want to know. I want to start a dialogue, and I want to chat to you about these different SaaS providers. But yeah, until next time, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you later. So what that means is, hello?